Farmer is humiliated at the mall, but they didn't know he was the owner's son. Robert Peterson stared at the gleaming floor of Eagleview Mall with a mix of embarrassment and indignation. His worn denim overalls stood out against the elegant clothes of the people passing by, some casting curious glances, others pretending not to see the nearly 70-year-old man sitting on the floor. Then, a man in an impeccable suit stepped on his straw hat, which bore the initials Good Hope Farm, while security guards surrounded him as if he were a criminal. Robert had simply asked where the most sophisticated jewelry store in the mall was. He wanted to buy something special for Margaret, his wife battling a severe lung disease. He never imagined he'd be treated like an intruder by Daniel Mitchell, the arrogant manager of the establishment. "People like you don't belong here," snapped Daniel, adjusting his expensive tie while looking disdainfully at the elderly man's calloused hands. "This mall wasn't made for farmers. There are street markets on the outskirts." Robert felt his face burn with shame. Several customers stopped to watch the scene, some filming with their phones. A young saleswoman tried to intervene, but was abruptly pushed aside by the manager. "I don't mean to cause trouble," Robert said calmly, struggling to stand. "I just came to buy a gift for my wife." "Then buy it somewhere else," Daniel replied, signaling the guards. "If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to take further action." What Daniel didn't know, and Robert had no interest in revealing, was that this simple farmer was actually the eldest son of William Peterson, the tycoon who had founded Eagleview Mall decades ago. Robert had left the family over 40 years, earlier after irreconcilable differences with his father. He had chosen a simple life in rural Illinois, dedicating himself to farming while his father built a commercial empire. He had never used the family name for privilege and had made sure to earn everything through his own hard work. Now, walking slowly toward the mall exit, Robert gathered the remains of his hat, a gift Margaret had given him on their first wedding anniversary. He felt defeated, but not for a moment did he consider revealing his identity. It went against everything he had built in 4 decades away from his father's influence. What he didn't expect was that Susan, his father's secretary, happened to be at the mall that day. From a distance, she witnessed the entire scene, immediately recognizing that aged face, still bearing the distinctive Peterson features. Visibly shaken, she grabbed her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Mr. William? You won't believe who I just saw at the mall." At Mercy Medical Center, Margaret gazed out the window of her hospital room. The supplemental oxygen helped her breathing, but did nothing to ease her worry about her husband, who had left earlier promising a surprise. "Where has that stubborn old man gone?" she murmured to herself, smoothing her grey hair in the window's reflection. Before long, the door opened, and Robert walked in, trying to hide his dejection. In his hands was a small box from an ordinary jewelry store, nothing like the one he had originally intended to visit. "Robert Peterson, you took your time," Margaret exclaimed, immediately sensing something was wrong. After more than 40 years together, she had learned to read every expression on his face. "The traffic was bad," he lied, leaning in to kiss her forehead, "but I brought you something." Margaret accepted the gift, but her eyes stayed fixed on her husband. "What happened to your hat, the one I gave you?" Robert hesitated. "I didn't want to worry you with problems when your health was already enough reason for concern." "Nothing. Serious? The wind took it when I was getting out of the car." Margaret didn't press further, but she knew there was more to the story than he was letting on. She decided to open the little box, finding a delicate bird-shaped brooch inside. "It's beautiful, Robert." "It's not what I wanted to give you," he confessed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I wanted something more special." "Everything that comes from you is special," she replied, holding his calloused hand. Between coughs, she added, "You know I've always known you'd have to face your past one day, don't you?" Robert looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Your father won't live forever, Robert, and no matter how much you've distanced yourself, you're still family." He let out a deep sigh. Margaret had always had this ability to see beyond appearances, to touch on points he'd rather keep buried. "Let's not talk about this now, you need to rest." At that very moment, in the luxurious penthouse office of Eagleview Mall, William Peterson, a 92-year-old man in failing health, watched a video on his tablet. His trembling hands held the device as he saw his eldest son being humiliated by one of the managers of his own business. "How could this happen, Susan?" he asked, his voice choked, staring at his longtime secretary. "The video is already circulating on social media, Mr. William. The PR team is trying to control the damage, but—" "I'm not talking about the video," he interrupted, weakly slamming the desk. "How could my own son be treated this way in the mall that bears our family's name? How did no one recognize him?" Susan took a deep breath before answering. "Mr. William, it's been over 40 years since Robert left home. Most employees don't even know the family history, and your son has never appeared at any public events or photos since." William closed his eyes, letting the memories flood him. The last argument with Robert still echoed in his mind as if it had happened yesterday. His son accusing him of prioritizing the business empire over family, of building his wealth at the expense of small merchants, of valuing money more than people. Harsh words, truths he'd never wanted to face. "I want you to find my son," he said finally, "not to bring him back by force, but to give him something. I've waited too long already." Meanwhile, at the small property known as Good Hope Farm, 200 miles from Chicago, Emily, Robert's assistant, watered the vegetable garden in the late afternoon. The 25-year-old had only worked there for a few months, but had already grown fond of the elderly couple who treated her like family. The landline rang, echoing through the quiet property. Emily ran to answer. "Good Hope Farm, good afternoon." "Oh, good afternoon," replied a formal voice on the other end. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Robert Peterson, please. It's a matter of utmost importance." "He's not here at the moment. Can I help with something?" "This is Susan Williams, secretary to Mr. William Peterson. It's critical that I speak with Mr. Robert as soon as possible." Emily felt a chill. In her time at the farm, she'd never heard of any relatives of her employers, let alone someone with a personal secretary. "I can take a message. Can I please tell him his father is very ill and needs to see him urgently? I'll leave my contact number. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. The next morning, Robert returned to the farm after spending the night at Mercy Medical Center with Margaret. He felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The incident at the mall had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just the embarrassment, but the memory of a world he had deliberately left behind. A world of appearances and judgments based on clothes and social status. Emily was waiting for him on the porch, visibly anxious. "Mr. Peterson, we got a phone call yesterday. A woman named Susan, secretary to a Mr. William Peterson. She said your father is sick and needs to see you." The old man froze, feeling the weight of those words. His father. After so many years, that bridge he thought he had burned for good was being rebuilt by illness. Or was it guilt? "Thank you, Emily. Can you give me the number?" The young woman handed him the paper where she had written the contact. Sensing her employer's distress, she asked, "Are you all right? I didn't know you had any family besides Mrs. Margaret." Robert gave a tired smile. "It's a long story, my dear, one I thought had ended long ago." He went inside, leaving Emily confused on the porch. In the comfort of his simple but cozy living room, Robert stared at the phone for long minutes before finally dialing the number. On the other end, a formal voice answered promptly. "Office of Mr. William Peterson, Susan speaking." "This is Robert Peterson," he said, feeling strange saying his full name after so long introducing himself only as Robert from Good Hope Farm. "Returning your call." There was a moment of silence as if the secretary was processing the information. "Mr. Peterson, I'm so glad you called back. Your father is eager to see you. He's not in good health and—" "I didn't say I would." "See him," Robert interrupted, his voice firmer than he intended. "I'm only returning the call out of courtesy. There's too much water under that bridge, young lady. I understand, but your father would like to give you something personally. He mentioned it's a matter that's been pending for decades." Robert took a deep breath. He thought of Margaret in the hospital, bravely fighting an illness that was consuming her lungs day by day. He thought of what she always said about forgiveness and reconciliation. "When?" as soon as possible. Can I send a car for you tomorrow? That won't be necessary. I have my own transportation. Meanwhile, at the mall, Daniel Mitchell, the manager who had humiliated Robert, was watching for the third time the video that had gone viral on social media. His subordinates avoided looking directly at him, fearing his explosive temper after being called to the boardroom that morning. "Have we found out who that old man is yet?" he asked Jessica, the young sales clerk who had tried to defend him. "I don't know, sir," she replied coldly. Since the incident, she had lost all respect for her boss. "But I don't think it matters. What you did was wrong, no matter who he is." Daniel glared at her irritably. "I don't pay you for your opinion, Jessica. I pay you to sell. And if you want to keep your job, I suggest you help me find out who that man is before the board takes drastic action." That same day, Nathan Mitchell, Daniel's son and a journalism student, was researching information about Eagleview Mall for a college assignment. Browsing through the municipal library's historical archives, he found an old article about the mall's inauguration. In the yellowed photo, he recognized the iconic William Peterson standing beside a young man who, though decades younger, bore an unmistakable resemblance to the elderly man humiliated in the viral video. The caption read, "Tycoon William Peterson and his eldest son, Robert Peterson, at the groundbreaking ceremony for Eagleview Mall, 1975. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. Could it be? The man his father had publicly humiliated was the son of the mall's founder? With trembling hands, she photographed the page and sent it to her father's phone with a simple message, "I think you need to see this right away." The next day, Robert was driving his old 1978 Beetle toward Chicago. He wore his best clothes, a simple dress shirt, slacks and well-polished shoes, what he wore to Sunday Mass. He had no hat, since the only one he owned had been destroyed at the mall. On the passenger seat sat a small hand-carved wooden box containing documents yellowed. With time, it was his only material connection to the past he had left behind. As he entered the city, he felt the weight of years of absence. Chicago had grown and transformed, becoming almost unrecognizable to him. Following the directions he'd received, over the phone he parked in front of a towering building in the financial district. On the 30th floor, Susan was waiting for him in the reception area. Her eyes widened when she saw him, as if staring at a ghost. "Mr. Peterson," she exclaimed, extending her hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Your father is waiting in his office." "Thank you," he replied curtly, uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings and under the curious gazes of the employees. Susan led him down a hallway, elegantly decorated with paintings of American landscapes. Ironically, one of them depicted a rural scene, much like the view from his farm. Stopping in front of a solid wood door, Susan knocked gently. "Mr. William, your son is here." The door opened, revealing a spacious office with a panoramic view of the city. Seated in a wheelchair near the window was a man Robert barely recognized, the once powerful William Peterson, who in his memories was still the imposing, authoritative figure from 40 years ago, now seemed frail and diminished by time. "You may leave us, Susan," the old man requested, his voice surprisingly steady for his age. When the door closed, the two men faced each other in silence. 40 years condensed into that moment. "You've changed," William finally said. "40 years will do that to a person?" Robert replied, still standing, clutching the wooden box. "Sit down, please. Don't make me look up for too long. My neck isn't what it used to be." Robert obeyed, choosing a chair across from his father. "I saw what happened at the mall," William continued, gesturing to a tablet on the desk. "I never imagined I'd see my son humiliated in a place that bears our name." "I haven't used that name in decades," Robert shot back. "I'm just Robert, from Good Hope Farm now." William studied him with a mix of sadness and admiration. "You've always been stubborn, just like your mother." He paused as if gathering courage. "I'm dying, Robert. We all are, in a way. No, I mean literally. A matter of months, according to the doctors." He moved his wheelchair closer to the desk. "And before I go, I need to right some wrongs." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder bearing the Eagleview Mall logo. "I want to transfer control of the mall to you. I've already given instructions to the lawyers. I just need your signature." Robert felt as if he'd been punched. Of all the reasons he'd imagined for this meeting, this was the least expected. "I don't want any of it," he said, standing abruptly. "I never did. That's exactly why I left, remember?" "I remember every word of that fight," William replied, his gaze steady. "You said I built empires at the expense of ordinary people, that I valued money over people. And you were right, Robert." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "I didn't come here for late confessions," Robert finally said. "I came because Margaret always taught me to respect my elders, even those who don't deserve it." "Margaret," murmured William. "How is she?" "Sick, very sick." Robert's voice faltered. "We're trying an experimental treatment, but it's extremely expensive." A glimmer of understanding lit up William's tired eyes. "Is that why you were at the mall? To buy something for her?" Robert nodded, turning his gaze to the window. The Chicago he had left decades ago stretched out below, imposing and indifferent to the human dramas unfolding within it. "Let me help with the treatment," offered William. "It's the least I can do for the woman who cared for my son all these years. I don't need your money. I never have. Don't be proud when it comes to her health." William's voice rose, surprising them both with its strength. For a moment, Robert saw the old authoritarian patriarch from his memories. "Let me do this, not for you, but for her." Before Robert could respond, the door opened, and Susan hurried in. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. William, but we have a situation. Daniel Mitchell is at the front desk demanding to speak with you. He's very upset." "Daniel Mitchell?" asked Robert. "The mall manager." "Yes," confirmed Susan, visibly uncomfortable. "The same one who trampled on my hat," Robert finished, with a calm that surprised everyone, including himself. "Tell him to come up. I think we have unfinished business." Susan hesitated, looking at William for confirmation. "Do as my son asked," ordered the patriarch. Minutes later, Daniel Mitchell entered the office, his face a mask of poorly concealed nervousness. He wore an impeccable suit, very different from what he had on the day of the incident. "Mr. William, I appreciate the opportunity to—" He stopped abruptly upon recognizing Robert. The color drained from his face. "Do you recognize my son, Mr. Mitchell?" William asked, his tone dangerously calm. Daniel swallowed hard, looking between them. "Your son?" "Robert Peterson, my firstborn and, as of today, the new controller of Eagle View Mall." The manager looked as if he might faint. "Mr. Peterson, I never would have imagined. There was a terrible misunderstanding. If I had known who you were—" "That's the problem," Robert interrupted, standing to face the man who had humiliated him. "You shouldn't treat anyone that way, no matter who they are. That mall serves the public, and the public includes farmers, janitors, bus drivers, and yes, overall wearing farmers." Daniel seemed to shrink with each word. "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Robert continued. "But there's a lot to fix. Starting with a saleswoman named Jessica, who tried to defend me and, as I've been told, was reprimanded for it." Daniel's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "I have my ways," Robert replied, not revealing that Emily, his assistant, at the farm, had spent the previous night scouring social media for details about the incident, uncovering comments from mall employees that detailed the internal fallout. William watched the scene with an unreadable expression, part pride, part sadness for all the years lost away from the son, who displayed an integrity he himself had never possessed. "Mr. Mitchell," William finally said, "I believe your position at the mall needs to be reconsidered. And that will be the first decision my son makes as the new administrator." Robert raised an eyebrow, surprised. He hadn't yet accepted that responsibility, but recognized his father's strategic move. "Not so fast," he said, sitting back down. "I haven't accepted that position yet, and if I did, I wouldn't start by firing anyone." Now it was William's turn to look surprised. After what he did, precisely because of what he did, Robert turned back to Daniel. "Do you have a family, Mr. Mitchell?" "Yes," the manager stammered. "A wife and a son in college." "Then you understand the importance of a stable job." Robert paused. "But you must also know that actions have consequences. I suggest you use your administrative skills to organize in the coming weeks an agricultural fair in the main atrium of the mall. Small producers from the metropolitan area will have the chance to sell directly to consumers without middlemen. Daniel blinked, confused by the unexpected turn of the conversation. An agricultural fair in the main atrium. Exactly, the mall was built on land that once belonged to small farmers. Robert gave his father a meaningful look. It's time to restore that connection. William lowered his eyes, recognizing the hint. The acquisition of the land where the mall stood had been one of the points of contention that led to their estrangement. "I'm sure Mr. Mitchell will organize an exemplary event," said William, regaining his composure. "Isn't that right, Daniel?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely," replied the manager, still dazed by the sudden shift. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse us, I have unfinished business with my son." When Daniel left, William turned to Robert with newfound respect in his eyes. "You're a better man than I ever was." "It's not about being better or worse," Robert replied. "We just chose different paths." "And did your path make you happy?" The question caught Robert off guard. In 40 years apart, he'd never imagined his father questioning his happiness. "Yes," he answered honestly. "Margaret and I built a simple but fulfilling life. Working the land, watching things grow, putting down real roots. There's a satisfaction in that money can't buy." William nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of you. She always said you had the wisdom I lacked." He sighed deeply. "About the mall?" "I won't accept it," Robert interrupted. "But I appreciate the offer for Margaret's treatment." William raised a hand, asking for silence. "Before you refuse, there's something you should know. The mall is on the verge of bankruptcy." "What? How is that possible?" "It's the largest shopping center in the region. Mismanagement, embezzlement, a series of problems covered up for years. Daniel Mitchell is just the tip of the iceberg." William slid the folder toward his son. "If the mall closes, over 1,000 people will lose their jobs. Families who depend on that place to survive." Robert felt the weight of the revelation. For decades, he'd seen the mall only as a symbol of the greed and materialism he'd rejected. He'd never considered the lives that revolved around it. "Why? May you have other children, contacts, experienced executives. Because you're the only one I trust to do what's right, not just what's profitable." William gripped his son's arm with surprising strength. "I'm not asking you to abandon your life or your principles. I'm asking you to apply them where they're needed most." Robert fell silent, taking it all in. He thought of Margaret, what she would say. She'd likely encourage him to help, to set aside old resentments for the greater good. "I need time to think," he said finally. "And I need to talk to Margaret." William nodded, visibly relieved. "I understand. But we don't have much time, Robert. Things are deteriorating fast." That night, back at the hospital, Robert recounted the meeting with his father to Margaret. She listened quietly, her tired eyes studying every expression on her husband's face. "What do you think?" he asked finally. "Should I accept?" Margaret smiled weakly. "After all these years, you still consult a sick old woman about life's big decisions." "The wisest woman I've ever known," he corrected, holding her hand. "Robert, for 40 years, you've built a life based on your values. No matter what decision you make now, don't let it contradict who you are." "But what if I can make a difference? Help those families, turn that place into something fairer?" Margaret squeezed her husband's hand. "Then do it. But don't lose yourself in the process." She paused, breathing heavily. "And Robert, forgive your father. Not for him, but for you." The next day, Daniel Mitchell drove nervously to Good Hope Farm. Following the GPS down back roads, he reflected on how his life had turned upside down in just a few days. From a respected and feared manager to organizing an agricultural fair, he considered humiliating for the mall's standards. And now, following direct orders from William Peterson, he was personally visiting the property owner's son to discuss event details. When he arrived, he was surprised by the simplicity of the place. He had expected something more ostentatious, perhaps a weekend farm for an heir playing at farming. Instead, he found a genuine working property, well-tended vegetable beds, a small stable, fruit trees arranged in productive orchards. Emily greeted him at the entrance, her gaze filled with distrust. "Mr. Peterson is in the tomato field," she said curtly. "You can go there, but don't step on the new seedlings." Daniel adjusted his tie, uncomfortable with the dust already staining his Italian shoes. He walked down the indicated path until he found Robert, once again in his work overalls and new straw hat, crouched among the tomato plants, harvesting by hand. "Mr. Peterson," Daniel called, trying to sound respectful. Robert stood slowly, eyeing the visitor with a neutral expression. "Mr. Mitchell, what a surprise. Your father asked me to come personally to discuss the fair details." Daniel extended a folder. "I've brought some preliminary proposals." Robert removed his gardening gloves, deliberately dirtying the folder as he took it. "We can talk on the porch. Would you like some coffee?" Daniel followed the older man, noticing the calluses on his hands, the sunspots on his skin, the slightly stooped walk of someone who'd spent decades bending over the land. It was hard to associate this simple man with the Peterson empire. On the rustic wooden porch, they sat in rocking chairs. Emily served coffee in handmade ceramic mugs, along with cookies Daniel suspected were homemade. "So," Robert began, flipping through the folder, "I see you envision the fair as a corporate social responsibility promotional event." The irony in his tone was unmistakable. "It's a strategic approach that benefits both the mall and the producers," Daniel defended, "and conveniently strips the original concept of any real meaning." Robert closed the folder. "No, Mr. Mitchell. The fair won't be a one-time event to improve the mall's image after the viral video. It will be the start of a permanent transformation." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. What kind of transformation? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Eagleview Mall was built on land that belonged to small farmers, Robert explained. "My father acquired those properties using methods that, if not illegal, bordered on immoral. Pressure, veiled threats, price manipulation. Many families lost their livelihoods." Daniel swallowed hard. That kind of talk could ruin the mall's reputation, and his own. "That was decades ago, Mr. Peterson. Times were different. Justice has no expiration date, Mr. Mitchell." Robert took a sip of coffee. "Part of the mall will be permanently dedicated to the descendants of those farmers. An organic market, local crafts, celebrating regional culture." "That's impossible. The board will never approve it. The board answers to the majority shareholder. Soon that will be me." Robert leaned forward. "But before any structural changes, we need to uncover what happened with the mall's finances." "My father mentioned serious issues." Daniel visibly paled. "It's normal market fluctuations. The economy is unstable, physical retail faces competition from online commerce." Spare me the rehearsed excuses." Robert stared him down. "I know something's wrong and I'll find out." Just then, Emily appeared on the porch. "Mr. Peterson, a call from the hospital. It's about Mrs. Margaret." The old man's expression changed instantly. He stood with surprising agility for his age. "Excuse me, Mr. Mitchell, we'll have to cut this short. Emily will see you out." As Daniel walked back to his car, he saw Robert rushing to the main house, his face a mask of worry. In that moment, he felt a genuine pang of remorse for what he'd done at the mall. At the hospital, Robert found Dr. Collins waiting in the hallway outside Margaret's room. His grave expression made the old man's heart tighten. "What happened, Doctor?" "Mr. Peterson, your wife's lung condition has worsened. We need to start the experimental treatment immediately, but the treatment isn't covered by public health care, and your insurance doesn't cover experimental procedures. We're looking at roughly $300,000. Robert's legs nearly gave way. It was an amount he could never gather. "From the farm's produce sales, even working for years. How long do we have?" "Weeks, not months," the doctor replied with professional honesty but compassionate eyes. In that moment, Robert knew he had no choice. He'd have to accept his father's offer, not out of ambition or late reconciliation, but for love of Margaret. "Can I see her?" "Of course, she's sedated but stable for now." In the room, Robert held his sleeping wife's hand, watching the shallow rise of her chest. 40 years of companionship, shared struggles and joys. He couldn't lose her now. "I'll get your treatment, my love," he whispered, "even if it means returning to a world we left behind." The next morning, Robert was back in William's office, his decision made. "I accept your offer," he said without preamble upon entering, "but I have conditions." William nodded, unsurprised. "I'm listening. First, Margaret's treatment starts immediately. Second, I'll have full authority to implement changes at the mall, including a permanent space for small producers. Third, I want an independent audit of the accounts for the last 5 years. That's all?" William asked with a faint smile. "And fourth, I won't abandon the farm. I'll manage the mall remotely whenever possible." William considered, for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. The papers are ready to sign." He gestured to a stack of documents on the desk. "As for Margaret's treatment, I've already instructed my assistant to contact the top lung specialists." Robert picked up the pen, hesitating a second before signing. He was about to re-enter the world he'd rejected for so long, taking on responsibilities he'd never wanted, but he'd do it for Margaret, and perhaps in the process correct some of his father's mistakes. "One last thing," William said as Robert finished signing. "There's something you need to know about Daniel Mitchell." "What about him? Does his last name mean nothing to you?" Robert frowned, trying to make the connection. "Should it?" "Michael Mitchell. Does that name sound familiar?" Understanding struck Robert like lightning. Michael Mitchell had been his father's main partner in their early ventures before the mall. According to the stories he'd heard, Michael had taken his own life after losing everything in a deal that had greatly benefited William. "Daniel is Michael's son?" he asked, stunned. "Yes, and he's not at the mall by chance." William suddenly looked older and wearier. "I believe he's been systematically diverting funds and sabotaging operations as revenge for his father's death." Robert felt the weight of that revelation. The humiliation he'd suffered wasn't a random incident. It was part of a meticulously planned revenge. Daniel probably hadn't known who he was at the time, but his hostility toward anything associated with the Petersons was clear. "Why did you keep him employed all these years?" "Guilt, perhaps." William looked away toward the window. "I never admitted it publicly. But Michael's accusations were true. I manipulated him, used insider information, ruined his reputation to benefit myself. When he took his life, I promised myself I'd look after his son." Robert felt a wave of nausea. This was exactly the kind of behavior that had made him walk away from the family decades ago. "And now you're putting me in charge of cleaning up your mess." "I'm trying to make things right before I go, Robert. It's too late for me, but not for you." Meanwhile, at Eagleview Mall, Daniel Mitchell was deleting incriminating files from his computer. News of the control transfer to Robert Peterson was already circulating among executives, and he knew his time was running out. For years, he'd systematically diverted funds from the business using shell companies and inflated contracts. His secretary knocked on the door. "Mr. Mitchell, Jessica Thompson is here. She said you requested a meeting." Daniel frowned. He hadn't scheduled any meeting with the young saleswoman. "Send her in." Jessica entered the office with an air of confidence, unlike her usual submissive demeanor. She carried a folder and had a determined look in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Jessica? I don't recall asking for you." The young woman smiled enigmatically. "Actually, I came with a proposal." She opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. "Here, I have copies of bank transfers, irregular contracts, and proof of embezzlement you've carried out over the last 3 years. The color drained from Daniel's face. How did you get these?" "My grandfather worked in the mall's accounting department. Before he retired, he noticed discrepancies. For years, he collected evidence, but was too afraid to come forward. When he passed 6 months ago, he left everything to me." Daniel stood up, threatening. "This is an invasion of privacy. Slander. I'll sue you." "You can try," Jessica replied calmly. "But copies are already in several hands, including the federal police." He collapsed into his chair, defeated. "What do you want? Money?" "I want justice for the small business owners who were pushed out to build this mall." She stared him down. I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing before everything comes to light. What are you talking about? My grandfather wasn't just an accountant. Before that, he owned a small property where the west parking lot is now. He was one of the farmers who lost everything to William Peterson. The connections began forming in Daniel's mind, the cycle of injustice, revenge, and redemption spanning generations. Why are you telling me this? Why not take this evidence straight to Robert Peterson? Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to make amends for their mistakes, including you. At the hospital, Margaret was waking up from a series of preparatory tests for the experimental treatment. Robert held her hand as Dr. Collins explained the procedure. The gene therapy we'll be using is groundbreaking. It was developed in Sweden and has shown promising results in cases similar to yours. The doctor smiled encouragingly. We just need you to sign the consent forms. When the doctor left, Margaret turned to her husband. How did you get the money for this, Robert? He hesitated, knowing he couldn't lie to her. I accepted my father's offer. I'm taking over the mall. Margaret closed her eyes, processing the information. You shouldn't have done that. Not for me. I did it for us, and maybe for many others too. He explained the mall's financial troubles, the employees who depended on it, and his vision to transform part of it into a market for small producers. Besides, I found out the manager who humiliated me is the son of my father's former business partner, who took his own life after being betrayed. The story is more complicated than we thought. Margaret studied him with that look that always seemed to see right through him. You've always said some wounds only heal when exposed to air. Maybe it's time to bring everything into the light. The next day, as Margaret began her treatment, Robert called a meeting with all the managers of Eagleview Mall. In the conference room, tense faces watched him, some curious, others hostile, all uneasy about the changes to come. Robert, wearing a simple dress shirt without a tie, and his new straw hat resting on the table in front of him, got straight to the point. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Peterson, son of William Peterson, and the new majority owner of this business. He paused, observing their reactions. Some of you may recognize me from the video that circulated recently, where I was humiliated by one of our managers. Murmurs spread through the room. Daniel Mitchell, seated at the back, kept his eyes down. I'm not here to return humiliation or seek revenge. I'm here because this place is in crisis, and many jobs depend on a change of direction. A middle-aged woman, introduced as the financial director, raised her hand. Mr. Peterson, with all due respect, the quarterly reports show nearly full occupancy and positive cash flow. I don't understand what crisis you're referring to. Robert gave a humorless smile. Reports can be manipulated, Mrs. Bennett, and that's exactly what I want to address. He placed a folder on the table. I requested an independent audit of the last 5 years of accounts. The results are alarming. The tension in the room was palpable. Daniel Mitchell looked ready to stand up and leave, but Jessica, seated strategically beside him, discreetly placed a hand on his arm. We've uncovered systematic embezzlement through inflated contracts, shell companies, and falsified reports. Robert opened the folder, revealing charts and graphs. The mall has been operating in the red for at least 3 years, masked by fraudulent reports. A ripple of shock spread through the room. The financial director visibly paled. This is impossible. I never authorized. We know the fraud was orchestrated by a small group, not the entire management, Robert interrupted. Those responsible will be held accountable, but pointing fingers isn't my goal today. I'm here to present a recovery plan. He then presented his vision for the mall, a redesign that would include a permanent space for small rural producers, reduced rents for independent stores, a training program for youth from the outskirts, and a full audit of existing contracts. Some of you may be wondering why a farmer who spent 40 years growing tomatoes thinks he can manage an enterprise of this scale. Robert smiled, this time genuinely. The answer is simple. I can't, not alone. I'll need each of you who still believes in this place's potential, not just as a profit machine, but as an integral part of the community. At the end of the meeting, as the managers left in small groups, eagerly discussing the proposed changes, Daniel Mitchell remained seated. Robert approached him. Mr. Mitchell, I'd like a word in private. When everyone had left, leaving just the two of them, Daniel spoke first. "I know what you're going to say. I'm fired and likely facing criminal charges." He smiled bitterly. "Fair considering what I did." "Actually, I came to offer you a choice." Robert sat beside him. "Your father was Michael Mitchell, wasn't he?" Daniel looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" "My father told me. About the partnership, about how he betrayed him, about what happened afterward." A heavy silence settled between them. "I was 12 when my father hanged himself in his bedroom," Daniel finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was the one who found him." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "I'm sorry, truly. For years I planned my revenge. I got a job here with a fake name and documents. My father had changed our last name years earlier, so no one made the connection. I worked hard, climbed the ranks, earned William's trust. And you started sabotaging the business from within." Daniel nodded. "At first it was small diversions. Then I realized how easy it was. No one questioned it, no one double-checked." He laughed humorlessly. "Your humiliation wasn't planned. I truly didn't know who you were. It was just the habit of looking down on simple people, the same kind of arrogance your father showed mine." Robert considered his words, the cycle of hurt and retaliation that kept repeating. "I have a proposal," he finally said. "Instead of prosecuting you, I want you to help fix what you broke." Daniel stared at him, disbelieving. "How?" "By personally overseeing the implementation of the space for small producers, using your administrative knowledge to make the project viable." Robert leaned forward. "And more importantly, helping identify other families harmed by the mall's construction, so we can offer some form of restitution. Why would you do this? Why give me a second chance after what I did?" Robert thought of Margaret, her words about forgiveness and redemption. "Because I believe everyone deserves the chance to make things right." He extended his hand, "including you." In the weeks that followed, Eagleview Mall underwent a gradual transformation. The main atrium, once occupied by high-end international brands, began hosting stalls for local producers. At first, traditional retailers resisted, fearing the initiative would devalue the mall's premium concept. To many's surprise, however, the market began attracting a new kind of customer. People who wouldn't normally visit a luxury mall started coming regularly, and many ended up browsing the conventional stores as well. Daniel Mitchell, initially skeptical, was surprised to discover a genuine passion for the project. His administrative knowledge, once used to divert resources, now served to create efficient management systems for small entrepreneurs with no business experience. Jessica Thompson was promoted to coordinator of the training program for underprivileged youth, using her own experience as the granddaughter of a farmer who was forced off his land to inspire participants. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Margaret was responding positively to the experimental treatment. Her lungs were beginning to show signs of recovery, and the doctors were optimistic about her long-term prospects. Robert Peterson divided his time between the farm, the hospital, and the mall, delegating much of the day-to-day operations to a trusted team, but maintaining firm control over strategic decisions. One afternoon, while overseeing the installation of an irrigation system for the vertical garden being created on the mall's main facade, Robert received an urgent call from Susan. "Mr. Peterson, your father has taken a significant turn for the worse. The doctors think it's a matter of days." In the hospital room where William was staying, Robert found the patriarch visibly weaker, hooked up to monitors and tubes. Despite his physical frailty, his eyes still held their characteristic spark. "How's the mall?" were his first words upon seeing his son. "Being transformed," Robert answered honestly. "Not without resistance, but we're making progress." William smiled weakly. "And Mitchell, did he confess?" "Yes, we're working together now." The patriarch raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Working together? With the man who embezzled millions and tried to ruin the business? With the son of a man who was unjustly destroyed?" Robert adjusted himself in the chair beside the bed. "We're trying to break the cycle, Dad." William closed his eyes, processing this. "You really are different. From me, Robert. Always were." "Maybe it's time for us to be less different." Robert hesitated before continuing. Yesterday I visited the mall's administrative floor. I saw Mum's portrait in your old office. She was the only one who kept me honest, William said hoarsely. After she was gone, there was no one left to remind me of who I used to be. There was me. You were too young, impetuous, idealistic. I couldn't hear you. And now? William opened his eyes, fixing them on his son. Now it's too late for me, but not for what I built. He reached for Robert's hand with effort. Use it better than I did, son. 2. Weeks later, Eagle View Mall welcomed a special visitor. Margaret, still on supplemental oxygen but visibly stronger, was guided by Robert through the main atrium, now transformed into a vibrant organic produce market. It's incredible what you've done here, she remarked, taking in the colorful stalls, the cheerful crowds, and the live music from a group of young musicians from the outskirts. It wasn't just me. It was a collective effort. They stopped at a stall where Emily was selling handmade jam from Good Hope Farm. "Mrs. Peterson," the young woman exclaimed, stepping out from behind the counter to carefully embrace the elderly woman. "It's so good to see you out of the hospital." "It's good to be back in the world, dear," Margaret said, looking around. "Though this is a very different world than the one I knew." Just then, Daniel Mitchell approached, carrying a carved wooden box. "Mrs. Peterson, welcome." He seemed momentarily uncomfortable, but pressed on. "I have something for your husband. A small reparation for what I did." He opened the box, revealing a carefully restored straw hat, the same one he had trampled months before. "We found local artisans who managed to repair it almost completely," he explained. "The original ribbon was too damaged, but it's been replaced with a new one bearing your farm's name." Robert took the hat, deeply moved. It was a symbol of so many things, of Margaret's love, of her life choices, of her journey back and redemption. "Thank you, Daniel. This means so much." A small crowd began to gather around them, as vendors and customers recognized the farmer from the video, now better known as the owner who had transformed the mall. Jessica Thompson emerged from the crowd, accompanied by a group of young apprentices from the training program. "Mr. Robert, Mr. Daniel, we have something to show you." She gestured, and the young people unfurled a large banner. On it read, "Michael Mitchell Community Market." Daniel froze, visibly moved. "What?" "The board approved it unanimously," Robert explained. "The permanent space for small producers will bear your father's name." A small step to right past wrongs. Daniel struggled to hold back tears. "I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep doing the work." As the small impromptu ceremony continued, with speeches, applause, and even a few tears, Margaret squeezed her husband's hand. "You turned a monument to consumerism into a space for community," she whispered. "Your mother would be proud." Robert adjusted the restored hat on his head. "It's just the beginning. There's still much work to do, wounds to heal, bridges to build." At the end of that day, as the sun began to set, Robert and Margaret sat on a bench in a small plaza, created on the mall's top floor, a green space overlooking the city. On one side, they saw the skyscrapers and urban frenzy. On the other, in the distance, they could glimpse the rural area where their farm was located. "Two worlds," Margaret remarked, following her husband's gaze. "You managed to unite them, Robert." "Not exactly. I just reminded them that one can't exist without the other." A young photographer from the marketing department approached, timidly. "Mr. Peterson, may we take a photo of you and your wife for the new institutional materials? The idea is to showcase the mall's journey and its renewed values." Robert looked at Margaret, who nodded. "Of course, but on one condition." He adjusted his straw hat. "I want to be exactly as I am. A farmer who happens to manage a mall, not the other way around." The young man smiled. "That's exactly what we want to capture, sir. The authenticity that transformed this place." As they posed for the photo, Robert thought about how life takes unexpected turns. 40 years ago, he had left Chicago vowing never to get involved with the family's commercial empire again. Now he returned, not as a reluctant heir, but as an agent of change. The mall, which once symbolized everything he rejected, ostentation, materialism, exclusion, had become, under his leadership, a space for integration and social justice. It wasn't a complete victory, nor a definitively happy ending. It was just a new chapter, with its own challenges and contradictions. But as he watched the small producers packing up their stalls after a productive day, the young people from the outskirts learning skills that would change their lives, and Daniel, Mitchell finding redemption in honest work, Robert knew it had been worth it. The humiliation he'd endured months ago, which could have ended in bitterness and resentment, had become the catalyst for a change greater than he'd ever imagined. And in that moment, with Margaret by his side, his restored hat on his head, and the setting sun bathing the city in gold, he knew he had finally made peace with his past. Not by erasing or forgetting it, but by weaving it into his present and future. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 6 months after the initial transformation of Eagleview Mall, the initiative began attracting national attention. Journalists frequently visited the site to document what was being called the Peterson model of socially responsible business management. Robert, despite his growing fame, remained true to his roots. He continued dividing his time between the mall and Good Hope Farm, now primarily managed by Emily, who had shown remarkable talent for sustainable agriculture. One Sunday morning, as Robert and Margaret were having coffee on the farm's porch, they were surprised by the arrival of an unusual group: Daniel, Mitchell, Jessica, and about 10 young people from the training program. "I hope we're not intruding," said Daniel, visibly uncomfortable in casual clothes, so different from the elegant suits he usually wore. The young people asked to see the farm that inspired the whole transformation. Robert smiled, standing to greet them. "It's never a bother to share what we love. Come, I'll show you around." During the tour, Robert explained the principles of organic farming he practiced, the importance of sustainable water management, and how he had established a symbiotic relationship with nature over the years. One of the young men, Tyler, who had grown up in the city's most violent outskirts, seemed particularly moved. "I never imagined planting could be so meaningful," he remarked, while helping Robert pick ripe tomatoes. "In my neighborhood, the only green we see is peeling paint on the walls. The land has a wisdom beyond what we can teach," Robert replied. "It shows that everything is connected, that every action has a consequence, and that patience and persistence eventually bear fruit." That informal visit became the seed of a new initiative. In the following weeks, Robert, with the help of Daniel and Jessica, developed an urban-rural outreach program. The mall would allocate space on its rooftop and underutilized areas for community gardens, cultivated by young people from underserved neighborhoods under the guidance of experienced small-scale farmers. "It's a way to rebuild the lost connection between people and their food," Robert explained during the project presentation to the board, "and also to create real opportunities for young people who typically wouldn't have access to formal employment." The project, named Urban Roots, initially faced resistance from more conservative board members who questioned the return on investment of an initiative that would occupy valuable commercial space. During a particularly tense meeting, one of the older board members slammed his fist on the table, exasperated. "This isn't a charity, Mr. Peterson. It's a business venture with shareholders expecting profits, not applause from NGOs." Robert remained calm in the face of the outburst. "I can assure you this isn't charity, Mr. Harper. It's a long-term business strategy." He slid a folder toward the board member. "Market studies consistently show that younger consumers prioritize companies with genuine social purpose. Plus, urban farming produces high-value goods that will be sold in our own facilities, eliminating transportation costs and middlemen." Daniel, attending the meeting as coordinator of the Michael Mitchell Community Market, added, "The numbers from last quarter clearly show the trend. Since the first changes were implemented, customer traffic has increased by 23%, and the average time spent in the mall has risen by 37%. That translates directly to more sales for all our retailers." Gradually, even the most skeptical board members began to recognize the merits of Robert's approach. The mall wasn't just surviving after the financial crisis caused by the embezzlement, it was thriving in a completely new way. Meanwhile, at Mercy Medical Center, Margaret was being discharged for good after successfully completing the experimental treatment. Dr. Collins, visibly pleased, signed the final documents. "Your test results are excellent, Mrs. Peterson. Your lung function has recovered beyond our most optimistic expectations." He smiled warmly at the patient he had cared for over so many months. "You're a success story that will go down in our history." Margaret, who had regained her vitality and put on some weight, thanked him emotionally. "I wouldn't have made it without this groundbreaking treatment, Doctor, and without my stubborn husband who moved mountains to get it for me." The doctor hesitated a moment before adding, "You know, Mrs. Peterson, not all patients have access to advanced therapies like you did. The costs are prohibitive for most families." Those words stayed with Margaret on her way back to Good Hope Farm. When Robert arrived that evening after a long day at the mall, he found his wife unusually thoughtful. "What's wrong, dear?" he asked, concerned. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm feeling like we need to do more, Robert." She lifted her eyes to meet his. "Dr. Collins told me today how many people don't have access to the same treatment that saved my life." Robert sat beside her, immediately understanding where her thoughts were heading. "Are you thinking of setting up some kind of fund for patients who can't afford it?" "Exactly." Margaret squeezed her husband's hand. "We could use some of the mall's profits for this. It would be a way to give back for the blessing we've received." The following week, Robert presented yet another initiative to the board: the creation of the Margaret Peterson Foundation, which would fund experimental treatments for patients with severe lung conditions who couldn't cover the costs. To his surprise, the proposal was approved without significant resistance. The board, which had once questioned every social initiative, was beginning to understand the broader vision Robert was trying to implement. Eagleview Mall was becoming more than just a shopping center. It was transforming into a community hub, a meeting point for different social classes, a space where commerce and social responsibility walked hand in hand. On a particularly busy Saturday afternoon, as Robert oversaw the opening of another green space on the mall's top floor, he was approached by an elderly woman watching with tears in her eyes. "For you don't know me," she said, her voice trembling, "but I knew your father many years ago. My husband Samuel had a small grocery store where the food court is now." Robert felt a tightness in his chest, anticipating what was coming next. "When we heard about the plans for the mall, Samuel tried to resist. We were the only business that refused to sell." The elderly woman paused, the memories clearly painful. "Your father used every means to force us out, pressure, veiled threats, until Samuel finally gave in for far less than what was fair." "I'm sorry," Robert said sincerely. "I truly regret what my father did." The woman smiled through her tears. "I didn't come to demand anything, Mr. Peterson. I came to thank you for what you're doing now. My grandson John is one of the young men in the Urban Roots program. For the first time in years, he has a purpose, a direction." She took Robert's hand. "You're fixing things you didn't even know were broken." That chance encounter deeply moved Robert. In the weeks that followed, he asked Jessica and Daniel Mitchell to discreetly look into other families who might have been harmed during the mall's construction. The goal wasn't to reopen old wounds, but to find ways to make amends. Daniel, in particular, threw himself into the task with surprising dedication, perhaps because he saw it as a chance for his own redemption, a way to honor the memory of the father he had lost. One afternoon, while reviewing old documents in the mall's archives, Daniel found something that visibly shook him. "What is it?" asked Jessica, noticing his sudden pallor. "I found my father's name." He turned the monitor so she could see. In an internal memo from William Peterson, dated 1975. "Remove Mitchell from the project at all costs. He knows too much about the negotiations with the farmers. Use the information from the red folder if necessary." Jessica read the document with growing unease. What kind of information would that be? "I'm not entirely sure. My father was an accountant by training. Maybe he uncovered irregularities in the farmers' negotiations." Daniel ran a hand over his face, trying to process the revelation. "My father didn't take his own life just because he lost money." He was silenced. The discovery shook not only Daniel, but Robert himself when he was told. The shadows of the past were darker than he had imagined. "What do we do with this?" asked Daniel, visibly conflicted. Do we make it public? Pursue posthumous legal action? Robert considered the question carefully. Revealing this now would mostly harm the people who depend on the mall today. Employees, small business owners, the young people in the program. He paused thoughtfully. But that doesn't mean we should hide the truth. I suggest we document everything, create a memorial for the affected families, and use this discovery to strengthen our commitment to transparency and justice moving forward. That was how Memory Space came to be, a small gallery in the mall dedicated to telling the full story of the development, including its darkest chapters. There, visitors could learn about the displaced families, the environmental impact of construction, and how the mall was working to make amends in the present. Surprisingly, the initiative was well received by the public. Instead of tarnishing the mall's reputation, it humanized it, showing that institutions, like people, can acknowledge mistakes and seek redemption. At home, Robert and Margaret watched, with satisfaction, the changes they were making. The farm remained their refuge, the place where they could reconnect with the simplicity they had always valued. But now that simplicity was no longer an escape from the world. It was a source of wisdom they could share. Emily, who had taken on increasing responsibilities at the farm, surprised them with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Peterson, I've been thinking, what if we turned the farm into a training center, a place where young people from the city could spend time learning sustainable farming hands-on?" The idea resonated immediately with the couple. It was a natural extension of the work they were already doing at the mall, a way to bridge the gap between urban and rural. With the support of the newly created Margaret Peterson Foundation, the Earth School project began to take shape. Simple but functional structure was built to host up to 10 young people at a time in 3-month immersion programs. On the day of the inauguration, as Robert led the first participants around the farm, he couldn't help but reflect on the unlikely journey that had brought him there. The humiliation he had suffered at the mall, which at first had seemed like just another bitter episode in his life, had become the catalyst for a quiet revolution. Daniel Mitchell, who was also attending the inauguration, approached Robert during a break. "When I stepped on your hat that day, I never imagined where we'd be today," he remarked with a mix of regret and admiration. "I wanted to destroy your dignity, and in the process I ended up finding my own." Robert smiled, adjusting the straw hat he rarely took off, even on formal occasions. It was more than an accessory. It had become a symbol of his journey. Life has these ironies, Daniel. That's why we should never close the door to the possibility of redemption, even in the most unlikely circumstances. That night, after all the guests had left, Robert and Margaret sat on the porch as they had for decades, gazing at the starry sky only the countryside could offer. "Do you think your father would be proud?" Margaret asked softly. Robert pondered the question. "I don't know if proud is the word, maybe resigned." He smiled. "Remember when we first met? I was so determined to be different from him that I almost lost myself in the process." "You never lost yourself, Robert. You just chose a less traveled path. And that choice ended up bringing me full circle, but with a completely different perspective." He took his wife's hand. "You know what's ironic? I'm doing exactly what I accused my father of never doing, using his resources for the common good to create real opportunities for people who would normally be left out." Margaret nodded. "Maybe that's how cycles are broken, not by rejecting everything that came before, but by transforming it into something better." As the night deepened, Robert reflected on all the events that had brought them here. The public humiliation that could have been just a painful episode, but instead became a turning point. Margaret's illness, which, amid the anguish, opened doors to reconciliation and new possibilities. The mistakes of the past that, once honestly confronted, became the foundation for a fairer future. The farmer who had been humiliated at the mall for not fitting in was now transforming it into a more welcoming and inclusive space. The son who had rejected his father's legacy was now redeeming it, not by erasing his mistakes, but by learning from them. The trampled hat, a symbol of wounded dignity, had been restored, just like the relationships and values that once seemed beyond repair. The next day, when Robert returned to the mall for a board meeting, he was greeted by employees and store owners with respect, not because of his name or position, but because of his actions. He walked through the halls, now decorated with plants and works by local artists, stopping to personally greet small vendors who would never have had access to that space before. At the meeting, he presented the results of his first few months, in charge. The numbers were clear. The mall had not only regained its financial stability but was growing in a sustainable direction. The social model he had implemented, far from being just superficial corporate responsibility, had become a competitive edge in a saturated market. "Ladies and gentlemen," he concluded, "we've proven it's possible to build a business that benefits everyone involved: shareholders, employees, the community, and the environment. Not as a concession or charity, but as a fundamental strategy." When the meeting ended, Robert was approached by one of the longest-serving board members who had initially resisted all his proposals. "I'll admit, I was skeptical, Peterson," the man said with surprising sincerity. "I thought your ideas for a community mall were utopian and naive, but you've shown us a vision none of us had." He extended his hand. "Congratulations. Your father would be proud." Robert accepted the handshake, but gently corrected him. "Thank you, but I'd rather think he'd be relieved. Relieved that we saw beyond the mistakes he couldn't avoid." That afternoon, as he crossed the main atrium on his way out, Robert stopped to observe the scene. Families strolling, young people working at the organic produce stands, elderly folks sitting comfortably in the gathering spaces he'd had installed. The mall, once a temple of exclusive consumption, had become a genuinely public space. A little girl of about 6 timidly approached him. "Mister, why do you wear that hat inside the mall?" she asked with the disarming curiosity of children. Robert smiled, bending down to her level. "Because it reminds me of who I am, even when I'm far from home." "Is it important?" "Very important. Once someone stepped on it, thinking they could make me less important too." Robert adjusted the hat. "But we learned together that a person's worth isn't in the clothes they wear or the places they go." The girl's mother approached, visibly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. She's very curious." "No need to apologize," Robert replied, standing up. "It's good to see children feeling at ease here. It means we're on the right track." As he left the mall that day, Robert gazed at the building with mixed emotions. For decades, that structure had represented everything. He rejected ostentation, materialism, inequality. Now, paradoxically, it had become an instrument of change, a space where his values could flourish and multiply, reaching far more people than his small farm ever could. The humiliation he'd suffered months earlier, which could have been just another bitter episode in his life, had instead become the first step on an unexpected journey of reconciliation, not just with his father or his past, but with the society he'd kept at arm's length for so long. The straw hat, restored after being trampled, had become a symbol of a greater truth. That true dignity can't be destroyed by shallow humiliations, that genuine connections are more valuable than status or appearances, and that sometimes we must lose something to rediscover its real worth. Robert Peterson, the farmer once humiliated at the mall, now walked its halls with the same authenticity he'd cultivated through decades of working the land, not as a suited executive trying to fit into a world that wasn't his, but as a man who had brought his world into that space, transforming it in the process. And so, in a perfect circle, the son who had abandoned his father's legacy to find his own path had ended up redeeming it, not by repeating his mistakes, but by learning from them and lifting his vision to a height the patriarch had never imagined possible. The end. So, what did you think of Mr. Robert's story? The humiliation at the mall turned into a chance for transformation, not just personal, but collective. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done in his place? We're eager to hear your thoughts.